We're joined from Sydney now by Ian Shapiro. He's a professor of political science at Yale University in the States. He's here visiting the US Study Centre in Sydney. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
How much harder, in your view, will this dreadful incident in Afghanistan make it for the United States to achieve both its military and foreign policy objectives in that country?
Well, of course, it's a terrible, tragic event, but I think what it underscores when we take a step back is that the United States is very unclear on what its military and strategic objectives actually are. And the real difficulty in Afghanistan, as in Iraq, is we've trapped ourselves into this repeat of the Vietnam syndrome, where we have what is essentially perceived as a puppet government dependent on America for its survival in place. And the only way we can get it to stand up and start to become a real government is to announce a timetable for withdrawal. Just as sort of if you have a lazy teenager who's not taking responsibility for his life, you can't say we'll keep supporting you until you do take responsibility. So we set a timetable for withdrawal, but of course that immediately sends an opposite signal to the insurgents that all they have to do is wait. And that once the U.S. is gone, they can reignite the civil war that is simmering beneath the surface. So I think that this tragedy just underscores the lack of clarity in American purposes in Afghanistan and in Iraq.
So do you see, therefore, that American troops and Australian troops, for that matter, when they do end up leaving Afghanistan, will, based on that argument, do so with their tails between their legs?
I think pretty much, and what will drive it very largely will not be facts on the ground, but again, as was the case with Vietnam, that the domestic American support and the domestic Australian support for the operation will eventually become so low that whatever government is in power will be forced to leave because vital American interests, vital Australian interests will not be seen to be at stake, and the cost will be seen to be too high.
Let's look at another foreign policy challenge facing the Obama administration now. That, of course, is Syria. You may have heard our top story this morning, rebel groups claiming there's been yet another massacre of women and children in the city of Homs. President Obama has just last week spoken of the dangers of anything resembling military intervention in Syria. But of course, Russia and China continue to veto any strong UN Security Council action. What options, therefore, does the US and, for that matter, the broader international community have in trying to confront President Assad's regime?
Well, I think the situation in Syria is truly tragic, and tragic in a different sense than we were just talking about, because it's not really manufactured by our own policy failures, as is the case in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think the situation in Syria has become an indigenous civil war, largely driven by indigenous conflicts that don't have much to do with American presence in the region, and indeed not even with the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I think that it's going to be extremely difficult for us to have any kind of positive impact on the situation there.
And President Assad would be fully aware of that as he continues his military offensive in various parts of the country.
I think that's right. I think he's unfortunately reached the point where he's got nothing to lose, and that makes dictators extremely dangerous, and I suspect that the situation is going to get worse before it gets better.
Now, Ian Shapiro, you've written quite a bit in the past on the policy of containment. You're a strong defender of the US policy of containment. That is what Barack Obama is largely seen to be doing when it comes to Iran. He argues that sanctions on that country should be allowed to be given much more time to work before Israel, for instance, considers military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Is that policy working from your perspective?
Well, I think the Obama administration goes one step forward, two steps back on that, because I think initially they were pursuing a fairly sensible policy of containment. Candidate Obama ran on the platform that we should talk to the Iranians, for which he took a lot of criticism in the election campaign. He tried to do that. He's been having multiple talks, official and unofficial, with the Iranians all along, and trying to use sanctions and other indirect means. But just last week, he, in my mind, very unwisely upped the ante by coming out and saying publicly to AIPAC, this is because President Obama is now running for re-election and is worried about Florida and Ohio. He came out and said to AIPAC, this is the big Israel lobby group in America, that containment is not sufficient with respect to Iran, and that the U.S. would engage in preemptive action if necessary to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I think that was a huge error.
And just on that issue, it appeared at the start of the year that the economy was going to be the key issue in this year's presidential election campaign, and it probably will be by the time the November poll comes around. But what we've seen in the last few weeks, if not months, particularly on the Republican side of the ledger, foreign policy issues like what to do about Iran, what to do in Afghanistan, increasingly coming to the fore. Do you see a lot of debate about foreign policy on the presidential campaign trail this year?
Oh, well, I do. 9 months is 100 lifetimes in politics, and I think it's extremely likely that Israel will escalate the situation in the Middle East between now and November. They will, unfortunately, Israel does not think the Obama administration is its friend and will reason that the one thing worse than an Obama administration will be a second-term Obama administration. And I think they're very likely, therefore, to try and force Obama's hand precipitously with respect to Iran before the election during the summer, rather than wait until afterwards when they'll have much less leverage over him. So I expect that situation to escalate in unhealthy ways, and I think his rather supine behavior last week is not encouraging in this regard.
Okay, Ian Shapiro, it's been fascinating chatting. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
You're most welcome.